Hey, welcome to Growing a Fruitful Brand, where we discuss how to create and grow a brand that makes the world a better place for you, your customers, and your employees. I'm Ben Lueders, founder and art director of Fruitful Design and Strategy, and this is my business partner and brand strategist, Raj Lula. And today, we're talking about, what are we talking about, Raj?
So I don't know if this is really going to be about branding so much, but we're going to talk about how pirate adventure books or island adventure books can make your company a better place.
There you go.
It's interesting. Actually, I put out on LinkedIn recently that you have all of these business books that talk about empathy and how you need to have empathy in the workplace, and I 100% agree, of course. But then all leaders read is business books,
Right.
that tell you that you need to have empathy. It's scientifically demonstrated that if you read or write fiction, that you'll have more empathy. So one of the best things a business owner could do for themselves is to read a novel. Like put down the history books, put down the nonfiction books. I know that you love World War II. It's great. I do too. But sometimes you got to read something that puts you in the shoes of another person or a group of people, whatever, and just and try to see the world from a different perspective. That's what empathy is all about. So with that in mind, that's the closest I can get to tying this to a business case. We're going to talk about Ben's book today.
I wrote a book.
Escape from Terikiak. And yes, we'll probably just acknowledge right away that we're both freaks who have been running a business for the last 12 or 13 years, who have families that depend on us. And we also both wrote books in that time. We are, in fact, crazy people.
That's right.
Let's start with the first and most basic question. What is Escape from Terikiak about?
Yeah, so it's a story about three brothers while on a family vacation to Slaughter Beach, Delaware. They find themselves whisked away to this magical island with strange talking creatures, and they find themselves separated from one another. So the book is all about them trying to find one another and to escape from this island of Terikiak. So it's a story about adventure, about hope, danger, and there's all kinds of interesting and funny characters along the way.
So it takes place in Slaughter Beach. Is this a gritty crime novel?
That's right. Oh, yeah. You better. Yeah, this is not for kids. No, actually, it is for kids. And so it's so funny. I was hanging out with my parents last night because Slaughter Beach, Delaware is a real place. It's not scary at all. It's named after
scary. Yeah.
I know, that's kind of the point. Like the kids, they're going to Slaughter Beach, in this place that their dad calls the slaughterhouse, but it's not scary at all. It's actually just named after a guy named William Slaughter from like the 1700s or something like that. But there's something really unique about the place, which is in real life, this is where horseshoe crabs just come to the beach by the like millions in the summertime. And one of my core memories when we figured it out, I was like just barely 4 years old, and I remember it like it was yesterday, visiting Slaughter Beach because my uncle was in town and he'd never seen the ocean before, and we were living in Maryland at the time. Drove up, that was like the closest beach, I guess, that we could get to. And my dad's like, we just like picked and it just happened to be when all these horseshoe crabs were there. So horseshoe crabs have a little bit of a part in this book. But they're really more of an Easter egg, actually, for the sequel that I'm working on now. They're a bigger part of the story, and that's all I can say.
Did you ever open your suitcase when you got home and like crab crawls out of it?
Oh gosh, no. But they are weird. If you're not familiar with horseshoe crabs, they're a really, really weird creature, and kind of fits right in with. There's a lot of these kind of mythical and made up creatures in this book, and so it's one of the real life ones that we have here in the real world.
The great thing is if you give it to your kids and they have never read the word slaughter before, they'll probably mispronounce it as slafter.
Slafter. So, it sounds a lot nicer.
Yeah.
It's like there's laughter, there's slafter. It's like, I love that.
So you can avoid the word entirely if you want to. So let's dive into it a little bit more. So one thing that's immediately obvious, which I think is also hilarious, is my book is a serious novel for adults. There's a lot of humor and hope in it, but it tackles a difficult subject of grief. Mm-hmm. And yours is a family island adventure.
Hey, there's some danger. There's some scary parts.
Oh, totally. Yeah, but, I was actually surprised.
Some violence.
Yeah. I was surprised at some points at how intense things can be, and in a good way. I've let all my kids read it, and they've all really enjoyed it. But yeah, it is, I think, funny, just an automatic, like, we kind of joke that I'm rain cloud and you're sunshine, and it's like, I wrote a serious book about grief and you wrote a family adventure, of course. But no,
We just play into the stereotypes.
we really do. But tell us a little bit more. What actually happens in the book?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, this is a book that I actually wrote with my kids. And so it really, just came out of this random brainstorm session years ago, like 6 years ago, when I had less kids and they were younger, and they were making up these creatures. And Jonah, my son Jonah, came up with the name Terikiak, riffing off of the word teriyaki. A lot of people think that sounds like I'm Escape from Teriyaki. Well, that's why. He would come up with these fun names. And anyways, it kind of started from that way, but it started evolving into more of a story. It was a thing that we kind of did together. And so, in the story, the three main characters, the three boys, the ficus kids, they're based on my three boys that helped me come up with these characters and stuff. And so, when they get separated, and at some points, some of the kids thinks that maybe the other one has died or been kidnapped. And so there's a lot of like emotion about like trying to hold on to hope that maybe the other one has survived, that there is hope that we can all get back together. And I found it actually a very emotional, you talk about empathy at the beginning, like thinking about, man, what if my little, my son was alone on this island, and like, it just kind of like evoked all of the like, fatherly feings, to borrow an alliteration. It's a lot of alliterations in this book. A warning, alliteration warning. But that's kind of the big part of the story is like, holding on to hope that we can be okay and that we can survive challenging situations. And of course, there's also a transformation element to it as well, where in the beginning of the book, the kids are just like every kid. They're kind of whiny, they're bored on vacation, they're doing this cool thing, but it's not really cool to them anymore. They're kind of, fighting amongst each other, not really appreciating what's different about each other. And of course, inevitably, as they're separated from one another, and as they each face individual challenges and new characters, they transform so that when they finally, I don't want to spoil it, but towards the end of the book, they're different people, and you almost don't recognize them. They've turned into people that are noble and courageous and brave, and just are so much more, are capable of more than they ever would have thought back on the beach. So
yeah. I don't read a lot of children's fiction. Like, I haven't read the Harry Potter books. I know that some of you are throwing things at your, laptop screen or whatever right now.
I'm in the middle of them now.
But, I was just like a little too old, although I have many peers who have read them and loved them. But I think I was around college or late high school when they started coming out. And so I wasn't quite in the, like, I didn't have kids yet,
right?
But also wasn't so young that they particularly appealed to me. My kids love them. I like the movies. We've started watching those together. And so I this was the first, children's fiction thing I read outside of reading picture books to my kids.
Oh, wow.
In a long, long time.
I'm honored.
And I was surprised as an adult how much I enjoyed it. The action is really good. The character building is really good. And, to that end, one of the things I really liked about the characters is, you have those archetypal characters through like all kinds of literature, right? And I'm going to use the word literature very broadly here because, you have like The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings where you're like, oh, I'm more of a Frodo, I'm more of a Samwise, I'm more of a Gimli, whoever. And you can kind of picture yourself as one of the characters.
Yes.
It's like, oh, I resonate with that one a little bit more than the others. And then all the way to less serious things like, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or any of your Star Trek, Star Wars, like which kind of character am I? What do I fit into? And I love that you have that in the book, like the different personalities of the brothers, because I have 3 siblings and I've got 3 kids, and you see that tension of like the different strengths of people that sometimes also rub you the wrong way because you're like, can you not just like think and then somebody else is like, can't you just go with your heart? And somebody else is like, just like, why don't we just lift this heavy thing over? There's people who just kind of have all these different ways of operating in the world. And I really feel like the brothers capture that really well, and the parents too. There's just all these different ways of engaging in the world. I want to come back to that in a little bit of talking about the process of writing with your kids. But let's just, talked about, we own a business. We've been working really hard on it for a long time. And you've got a lot of kids. I've got a lot of kids. It takes a commitment to do something like this.
Yes.
Why did you do it? Why did you write a book?
Yeah, that's a good question, Raj. I mean, at first, I didn't really want to write a book initially. It was just kind of like, it's this fun thing. But I think as it started developing, it kind of was asking for it. I felt like it felt like it needed to be something, and it was becoming something that I wanted to share, and I think my kids wanted to share as well. And so, I'm like, man, if I'm actually going to develop this, I'm going to spend some time on it. I want it to be something that I could share, at least, to the people that I know around me. But maybe it's just the marketer in me or like the business owner in me. But I'm like, I immediately think like, okay, we need to distribute this as widely as possible. We need to get this thing on
professional illustrations,
and
the whole
I think
deal.
too, at the same time, that those kind of distribution lanes and stuff are just so much more available now. So it's like, you can, if you're going to be making this thing anyways, you might as well distribute it, as broadly as possible. And so, in some ways, it was like, it was kind of felt almost inevitable. But I think the thing I just didn't realize how much work it was going to be. It's just like, because initially, this is like a 300-page novel, book one of a series. I'm like working on it. So like, I got myself in it. Initially, I thought, hey, this is going to be one of those little 20-page picture books you read to your kids. They go to the island, they come back. It was all a dream, and whatever, and everyone can go to bed. And so, but as the characters started developing, it just became so much more. And so, that was a little bit unintentional, but when it got to that point, it was like, man, I've got to get it out there.
Yeah. Who is this book good for?
Yeah. Everyone, but it's really targeted more at kids from like ages 8 to probably like 13, in that range, kind of middle grade range. But I will say, to Raj's point, Raj enjoyed it. I've had a lot of adults just read it on their own, even people without kids that have really gotten invested in it. And so, I joke about it, but like people older than that. People younger, they're kids that are younger than 8 might struggle to actually physically read the book, but a lot of my nieces and nephews and I know kids and families at my church, like they have been reading it aloud to their kids that are younger, and the kids are into it. My daughter Donna, who wasn't really a part of writing the story because she was so young, she's 5 now. We just finished Escape from Terikiak last week, reading it all the way through with all of the kids. And in the final version, we read an earlier version years ago when Donna was small, and she just loved it. She was probably the most invested in the book at 5, and she was retaining it. So I think ideally the kids are probably going to get the biggest kick out of it, like that 8 to 13, but older, younger, I think they can all appreciate it as well.
You might have to change the quote on the back of the book. I love the quote. It says, "I don't remember any parts of this book." Donna, age 5.
I've gotten more responses from that, throwing that on there.
Yeah,
my boys were like, "Don't put that on there. That's weird. People aren't gonna like that." I got like day 1 and 2 after launching, after people started getting their books, I was getting so many pictures of that and like saying that was their favorite part of the book.
The inside's pretty good too.
The inside's good, but for the cover, that's probably the best part.
Yeah. So, everybody asked me this question when I wrote my book, and I think you and I did have slightly different approaches. How did you find time in all of this to write a book?
I'm getting a lot of people asking me that. That's the same question I'm asking myself.
Yeah.
For one thing, I wrote this book over 6 years. So I obviously didn't do that great of a job of making daily time for it. It was really a lot of spurts. I wrote a lot of it on a couple of vacations, nights and weekends, probably more weekends. It was extra time because like Raj has already said, we've got a bunch of kids. We're running a business that's taking up a lot of our time, trying to be good husbands and, members of our community. And so it was hard. I found that for me, I would be out of it for a while. And then when I had some serious, bigger openings, I would really deep dive and get a lot done. But I am trying to change that. I will say for the second book, I am trying to make a more regular practice of writing now.
Yeah.
So that I don't get out of it as much too. And I don't know, I can't remember if we got into this when we talked about your book, Raj, but for me anyways, there's enough happening in the story and the characters that if I was not writing it for a couple weeks, I'd forget where I was and I would forget the tone, or I would have to reread 3 chapters to remember to get myself into it. And I find now that I've been writing a little bit more regularly and not getting out of it as much for the second book, I don't have to do that every time. It's I know right where I'm at because I'm not waiting, weeks or even months to get back into the story. And so, I would encourage people, if you do want to write a book, to try to, even if it's 30 minutes a day or something like that, to try to make that happen. It can be really hard though. And supplementing that with extended periods of time where you can get a good, 2 to 3 hours of focus time, which is almost impossible as unless you're on an extended vacation or holiday or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious. So you wrote with your kids.
Yeah.
And I don't know if your kids are just extraordinarily good or creative or whatever,
They are.
but but how do you not end up with things Captain Fart Bones or something in the was
Yes.
was that
That's
something
so
that
good.
happened that you kind of
Yes.
steered your kids away from, or was that something that they just didn't do?
No. Okay. So thank you, Raj. That's a really good one. It actually sets me up for some good stories. So I kind of, when it first started, they were so young. And so there was a lot of that. And I took an audio recording of I think our first brainstorm session because it was getting so fun. I was I just need to have this. And their voices are they all have speech impediments and they all sound so cute and it's hard to understand what they're saying half the time. And there's so many bad ideas. So it's not oh, my kid, this is just what came out of their mind and I didn't filter it at all. It was a collaboration, right? And so the funny thing in listening to those recordings, I'm shooting down their ideas way more than I wish I was.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really sad to hear. I'm no, buddy, that's not going to work. And here's why. And one of my favorite parts of our brainstorm time that I like to share with people was actually turn into one of the best parts of the book. So my son Isaiah was probably 5, and it was early on. We just to determine that there's these pirates were going to be a big part of the story, right? And that Alexander's character was going to be captured by pirates. And so I'm we're talking about this scene where the pirate's going to make him walk the plank, and he has to find some way to convince them not to feed him to the spike-covered sharks and all this stuff. And then Isaiah's oh yeah, and then over here on the side, there could just be a walrus drinking coffee and just kind of hanging out. And I'm no, buddy. I have a recording of this of me being dude, no, why? We're not gonna have a walrus just hanging out on this pirate ship drinking coffee. What is wrong with you? And so literally, and we should flash it up on the screen. I have a sketch of this pirate captain pointing a sword at Alexander and him freaking out. And then I have this little doodle of a walrus in the corner with glasses and a mustache drinking coffee, just humoring him. Yeah, sure, there's going to be a walrus. And then a couple weeks later, as I was going over the story with them, I was realizing maybe I need to stop shooting down all of their ideas. Maybe there's ways to actually take these crazy creative ideas and try to transform them into something. And so, as some of you might know, that pirate captain actually turned into a walrus that drinks coffee. And so we found a way to to kind of unite those things. And after I started actually listening to some of those crazy things and finding ways like, how can I redeem these, I guess? Some of them we just kind of, ignored. But you have to kind of like use that discernment of like, hey, how can I use this? Is there something here? Maybe not exactly. It's not like the walrus bystander didn't really make sense. But like, what if he actually became, and he's one of the most interesting and favorite characters of a lot of the kids is the big bad guy, which is Winifred the Walrus.
Yeah, I want to spend a minute with this because this actually does get into like where growing a fruitful brand is about. So a few years ago, Dr. J.J. Peterson from Story Brand, it was at one of our summits. He talked about the improv concept of like when you're doing improv comedy of yes and. And
he has a background in improv, right?
Yeah.
He's like really good at it.
And he's done some acting as well. And
was he on The West Wing? Have we talked about
the
this?
West Wing? We haven't talked about it on the podcast, but it's one of my favorite stories. If you care about that show and you're ever going to meet him, you should ask him because when he came in for our 10th anniversary party, I was enthralled by his story.
Raj is such a fan of The West Wing that when he first saw JJ, he was like, "You're from The West Wing, aren't you?"
No, unfortunately, I wish that I had. We actually know one other person who was on The West Wing too, from Lindsay's college days. But so I have these small little connections to my favorite show. But no, JJ was talking about the concept of yes and how you can use it in business. So basically, the concept of yes and is in a comedy scene, a sketch comedy scene, or an improv comedy scene, you are not allowed to say no. You say yes and. So, if Ben and I were doing a scene here and he's got a briefcase or a suitcase or something and I go, well, what's in your suitcase? And he pulls out a pineapple or something. Yeah. But I thought he was going to pull out a gun or divorce papers or whatever, something that maybe would more likely be in a briefcase. Then I'm not allowed in the scene to go, no, I don't think that is a pineapple because that takes all the energy out of the scene.
Yes, you gotta go with it.
Yeah, and so you go yes, and what else is in there is another option you could do. Yes, and I've been looking for that pineapple, and you take and it becomes part of the fabric of the story. Yes, and it's not necessarily what you anticipated. It's not necessarily what you wanted, but the really interesting thing is that it. I think very well articulates the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset.
Yes.
And I'll say this is something that I struggled with for years. Like if you, for some people who worked with us for many years, this was a critique of me as a leader was, you and I are people who write books. We have like very strong vision for where we want things to go, all of that. And so it's easy to just go to almost have meetings just to rubber stamp your own idea.
Right. You already have it all kind of pre-written or pre-designed in your head. And it's you're going to go with my version.
Yeah. In fact, we've got a client right now that I went into a meeting last week and I had a pretty clear idea what I thought something would be. And then they started throwing out better ideas. And I still have to check myself to go, I actually need to be present in this room and hear what they're saying.
Take that ego out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's the crazy thing of listening back to that audio recording I had with my kids is like, when I like shot down his idea like that, I could just hear it.
Yeah.
Like just the creativity died. That's how kids lose their imagination. That's how we all kind of grow out of that spirit of adventure that we have as kids. People tell them, oh, that's not going to work, buddy. No, like that's terrible improv. It's terrible creativity. And I love that Raj is bringing it into our work because this is totally how we have learned to work now. Yeah. And I see Raj do it all the time. When Raj is one of these weird people who likes writing in front of other people. He does it with clients all the time. Like literally they'll be like working side by side. He'll be working side by side with a client on like the verbiage for their homepage. And he might be writing one thing and then the client's like, we don't really say it that way or we don't really do it like that. And just seeing Raj being willing to the improv of it all, like on the spot, like, okay, how about this? Okay, how about this? Like, yes, and it's very collaborative. It's very fun. I think it's one of the reasons why people like working with us. And it's the same thing when it comes to me designing a website, designing a logo. In fact, I mean, it's not released yet, but I'm working on this book cover design for someone else, and they just approved the design yesterday. But it was this evolution, and it's crazy. The design that I sent them, I think it was beginning of this week or last week, I look at that design compared to the one that we got to right now. I love this new design so much more.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was because of stuff that the client said.
Yeah.
It was ideas that they had, good ideas they had. And I could have doubled down on my ego and been like, no, here's why I had this vision, this thing, and it has to be this way. But instead, I listened and went with the improv of it all. And it's a much better design.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm glad that like I learned this lesson a little bit with my kids, and I'm glad it's something that we have grown into as well at Fruitful.
Yeah. I think one thing I would add about the yes and of it all is that it doesn't mean agreeing with the other person.
Correct.
Like a pineapple in a briefcase might have still been a stupid idea, you know?
You can actually use that as a murder weapon too. I mean, it
well,
doesn't.
actually, the funny thing is that that there are ways that again, you don't want to fully reject it, because part of it is when Isaiah brought up that idea of a walrus, it wasn't just that he was saying like, oh, walrus drinking coffee is funny, It was, can this be more fantastical?
Yes.
Like maybe it's not a human pirate threatening me. Like, what if there's, and so where you take that idea collaboratively beyond that, that's what makes it special. And so you could pull the pineapple out of the briefcase, and I was really hoping for a weapon of some kind so that we could stage a fight in our comedy scene. Or also just ratchet up the tension or something, because that's going to equal bigger, funnier moments. And so, you can pull the pineapple out of the briefcase, and I could say, yes. And why is it ticking? And all of a sudden we're in a different situation. And that certainly wasn't what you anticipated when you pulled a pineapple out of a briefcase.
Yeah.
But then you get the chance to come back into the world, and we end up in a place that is more similar than we ever thought.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because he was like, there could just be this guy, this walrus randomly here, and it's like, okay, yes. How about the walrus is actually in the story? How about, exactly. And so there was a lot of that kind of stuff. And, there was sometimes, names that the kids chose or came up with were too similar to other things that exist. There was some kind of back and forth that we had to do. And then there was a certain point too in the creation of the story where I had to just kind of go into my hobbit hole a little bit. Like I had gotten all these great pieces from them, but I wanted there to be some level of surprise and delight for them too. So that when I read it, they'd be like, oh, like I didn't want to be like, yep, that's exactly how I dreamed it up when I was 6 or whatever. I still wanted there to be some elements that they would get a kick out of too, some little surprises. And so I'm experiencing that too now that I'm working on book 2, is like they've helped me with a lot of things, and they're continuing to help me with certain characters and scenes and scenery. But I still want there to be some things that when we read that first draft, I want them to have some moments of surprise at like, oh wow, you did that with that. Okay, I helped you come up with that character and that setting, but I didn't realize this other thing that you riffed on, because I want them to also enjoy the book. And if they know everything that's happening, it's a hard balance to kind of strike. Yeah.
Well, I think that's an interesting. This is probably going to be my last question, but I'll move it up to the middle here. We talked a little bit yesterday about how you tell the difference between something that is a fun hobby project that you do with your kids, and something that's going to become a book, store quality book, and because we get approached a lot by people who go, oh, my cousin wrote a book, maybe you can illustrate it or whatever, and we have 3 nickels. It's very sweet, and we don't mind those approaches at all. We're happy to have that conversation because these things do become things sometimes. And also, any of our mentors would have looked at us 8 years ago, 7 years ago, and gone like, do you really have time to do this? Should you be doing this?
Right.
And so like every creative idea is crazy when you do it. I mean,
Yes.
one of our big inspirations, the Muppets, was like such a crazy idea.
Still kind of crazy.
I think the original Kermit was made out of Jim Henson's mother's coat, you know? and
did she ever find out?
I'm pretty sure it was orange, which is not a good color for a frog, you know? And,
was it all in black and white though, so you couldn't
I think
tell
so,
the
yeah.
color?
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
yeah. And so, you know, it's like all of these ideas are weird and crazy at the beginning. And at the same time, some of them have legs and some of them don't.
Yeah.
How do you kind of think through that of like, is this just a fun family project that we should print 5 copies on Shutterfly so that the kids can have one, but then we're going to move on with our lives, or just like have this be a fun thing that when they have kids, maybe they stored this in a box somewhere and they read it to their kids like, oh, this grandpa came up with this or whatever, but it's not a thing. We don't have to put it out in the world, whatever. Like talk through that. How do you determine the difference in those things?
Yeah. I mean, for me, there's a couple things that come to mind for that, Raj. One is that, you know, first of all, it was just something that was just for me and my kids initially. And the thing that kind of got it outside of that was when I just started sharing it with other people outside of that realm. And I think I would encourage you, if you've got this idea or if you have this thing, share it with some people that you trust that would give good, honest feedback, because you know, you don't know what you have unless you kind of share it and see if it resonates with people. Maybe it is just a bunch of inside jokes and maybe it doesn't really make sense. Maybe it's better as just a family, just something for you and your kids, and it was a fun time, you know. But you don't really know that until you've gotten some other perspectives on it. And as I started doing that, I just started getting really good feedback of people excited about, you know, I shared it with some kids right in that age range of 8 to 13, and them so excited. Some of them read it in a day. Some of them couldn't wait for the next book. Some older people, some folks like you, just gave me like really, really positive feedback of like, this seems like it could be a thing. And so that was really encouraging. And maybe if it had been different, it'd be like, yeah, I mean, you know, it's fine, but it's kind of all over the place. And maybe, you know, like, then maybe it would have just stayed smaller. But I think the second thing that kind of encouraged me to kind of get it out there to see what it could be is I was just getting a lot of feedback from people in conversations about how important it would be to my kids for me to see something all the way to completion. Even if it never becomes the New York Times bestseller, never gets picked up by a big publisher, whatever, just for my kids to see their dad take something to the finish line, whatever that is, self-publish, you know, but just that it's like this thing, like we did this together so that, you know, that my kids would be able to someday like point to this and be like, hey, like we did this thing together, and it wasn't just like this fever dream. Like it's like it's a thing, and like their names are in here too, and like I wanted to have that kind of like artifact, and kind of like, even if this is as far as it ever goes, and the sales that I've gotten so far is all it ever does, like I want my kids to be like, you know what, like, because dad saw that thing to completion that one time, like maybe I can see this thing to completion. You know, like kind of just modeling, like just finishing something. There's something about that. And so the other thing is it took me so long, and especially there's also, I think, 24 chapter illustrations, full page chapter illustrations in here as well. The time that it took to actually make this thing, it's like I had to like share it a little bit broader to see if I could like get some kind of financial payment back, at least to like, you know, just to pay break for even. Break even. This is definitely not a get rich quick scheme, but like, yeah, if it could kind of like sustain the hobby, you know, so like I have like a little bank account, you know, for this and stuff. And it's like, I'm mainly just buying author copies with that money or stickers to like give out, you know, but it's like self-sustaining right now. I've not gotten rich off this yet. Knock on book. But but it's like, yeah, it's like this self-sustaining thing. At least I'm not like, you know, going into debt on it or something at the moment. And hopefully that account will get to a certain number that I can pay for the editor for the next book or whatever, you know.
I did go to that on these, so
yeah, that's a different podcast. I also was really wanting to watch and see how Raj's thing played out before I pulled the trigger on a few things. So learn from any mistakes. I'm not saying that what he did was a mistake. I'm just saying, like, yeah, everyone has different risk tolerances too, and we've talked about this some. Like, you know, you're creating an adult novel too, and there's like. Adult novel. That sounds really dirty, but I didn't mean it like that. But like
novel for adults.
There's a different expectation, I think, you know, with the quality and with other things like that I know you wanted to control. And this is just Amazon print on demand. It's not necessarily, you know, the finest craftsmanship binding or whatever, but you know, it's finished though.
And they're going to get knocked around in backpacks and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Too. So it's very similar to how the Wingfeather Saga is printed, and so like in the market, it's very appropriate for what
exactly.
Every one of you who likes or subscribes to our podcast makes my kids feel like we're famous. And to be honest, that's all I'm really doing this for. You know, I want to drill a little bit deeper down into that of sort of the difference between a hobby and something you should actually release. And you kind of alluded to it with the separate bank account. But, you know, for me, one of the things when we talk to people who have this dream of writing or publishing a book is, and I think that both of us have realized in publishing something, is that you are starting a new business doing this. And so that actually should be one of your determinants in if you're trying to decide between, should this just be a family heirloom? Should this just be a family tradition kind of thing? Or should this go to market? Is that you are starting a business. It will have costs.
Yes.
And it will take time and hard work. And the like myth of the, you know, Jack Kerouac types or you know, whoever, you know, Salinger, whoever, kind of like writing in their little cabin or in the back of a truck or whatever, and then like releasing a work of genius out into the world, and you know, one person grabs it, oh my gosh, you got to read this, and they tell two people, and it, you know, goes viral and explodes out in the world. That basically doesn't exist anymore. I'm not sure it ever really existed. You know, I've told the story many, many times, but like The Great Gatsby was not a success financially, commercially. At the beginning, it was it only became a success because he had so many unsold copies that the U.S. government approached him and asked if they could send them for free out to soldiers in World War II. I think they paid cost, but like he made basically zero money on the thousands of copies they sent to soldiers in World War II. And so like it, you know, you have to be really, really wanting to do this to get it out in the world. Another thing that I think goes along with that is that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like you just took every personal whim or every kid whim, every family whim, and just shove it into the book here.
No.
There's clear evidence of story structure, of discipline, and so you are committing to a professional process as well.
Yes.
And even with your illustrations, I think that there, again, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you probably wouldn't have done 24 fully finished illustrations for this if you weren't, you know, maybe 3, and then at that point you go, is this worth continuing to do all the way to the end? And yes, there's the persistence thing, the modeling for your kids. But you could also like, I'm gonna do the next 20 simpler, you know, or whatever.
That's what I'm feeling with the second book. Like, I don't want this to take 6 years.
You know, but yeah, so talk to me if you would about some of the discipline that went into the book, especially around story itself.
Yes,
because I feel like, you know, when we hear a lot of people talk about their you know, stories that they want to tell, because they mean so much to them, and I don't want to denigrate that even a little bit.
No.
But there is a difference between, I want to make this a commercial product, I want to make this something that I'm going to put out into the world, I'm going to start a business around, and something that you go, I'm doing this just because it means so much to me. You know, because people who say things like, you know, oh, I want to write a book about being a grandpa called Mr. Bubbykins because that's what my, you know, grandkids call me because nobody could pronounce grandpa or whatever. Like, and it's like, that's really sweet, but that's, first of all, it's not a story. Like Mr. Bubbykins has to do something. Yeah. And there has to be some action that actually drives this story, some plot. And secondly, does that matter to anybody who doesn't know the handful of
Yeah, it's
you
like
on
making
this
you
planet?
the hero of this story. in
Yeah,
some
exactly.
ways.
So
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about the discipline that goes
Yeah.
into deciding what goes in, what goes out, and what some of the resources that you use to develop your sense of story structure, all of that. Like how did you make it good?
Yeah, thanks, Raj. Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's one of the reasons why it took so long is because I did have like a rigorous, process that I would go through. A lot of, high level, just writing out kind of timeline storyboards for the different characters. There were like these little course scenes that kind of came to mind as I was riffing with my kids, but like how to actually get there. And how to get back from there, and all the connections thereof. There was a lot of like planning and storyboarding. Raj and I both used an app called Scrivener for kind of writing out and planning our books. I encourage you to check it out if you are considering at least writing fiction. I know that other types of writers use it as well. But it can help you get key scenes out and then kind of shuffle them around as needed in like kind of a visual way. That was one of the features that I used in Scrivener. And so, yeah, it wasn't like, it wasn't a quick process. And there was also time. So I kind of had to balance these two things. One is like just over planning the thing and then just writing. Yeah. So these are like these two tensions. And so some people are just kind of more kind of planning people. They love that kind of like big picture, like story arc thing. And I'm a little bit that way. I think that comes from building websites and architecting people's visual branding. Like I do like that view, but if you just stay up there the whole time and you don't just get your hands dirty and get into that story, there's like a I've heard people describe it as almost like a spiritual element to storytelling where you have to get into the story and you might be surprised by what those characters might decide. That was a piece of advice actually that Andrew Peterson, author of Wingfeather, I was on this like group Zoom call over the pandemic. I was kind of halfway through my book, but kind of stuck because I had been over storyboarding it. And he had this piece of advice, which was that was his problem early on, and that he just forced himself to get into the story. And he was really surprised at some of the choices, some of the directions that things went when he just started writing. And so about halfway through, around that time, I kind of forced myself to err on the side of just like getting into the story, seeing where it goes, that's part of the adventure of it too, right? The unexpected adventure of it is I kind of know where this is going. And that's where I am in book 2 right now, actually, where it's like, I know these like kind of obligatory scenes or whatever that need to happen. And I'm at a point now, and I'm not entirely sure like exactly how we're going to get to those places and how stories will overlap. And so at least in this first draft, I'm like really just trying to discipline myself to just be in the story, develop these characters and their kind of desires and problems and stuff like that. And I'm finding it a lot more fun as a writer too, and Raj knows this, like dialogue and the interpersonal in fiction writing, like that's the fun, right? It's like as these personalities interact and stuff, that's the fun part. And so trying to force myself to have a story structure, to plan, but then to not overly plan. Because one funny story I have about overly planning, and I shared this in my gallery. I did a gallery presentation recently, and I shared a little bit of this story. But probably a year, I don't know what year it was, maybe 2021 or something like that. I went down this whole story structure that I thought was so cool and so original. And I pitched it to my kids and my wife. I remember I had it all written down in this notebook, and I was like, okay, we came up with this, but what if we did this? And then my wife goes, isn't that Spy Kids 2? And I just was like my whole life flashed before my eyes. And I'm like, that is Spy Kids 2. And I love Spy Kids 2. And I did it all the way down to like I had these creatures called monkey spiders instead of spider monkeys, and that's literally right out of Spy Kids 2.
my gosh.
But it was like going to be this like crazy scientist is making these combinations of creatures and they're taking it over and blah blah blah. And there's this volcano, and there's like, oh snap. And so like I thought that was a great idea for an entire year, and my kids totally agree. It's like, yeah, that's kind of lame, and it ruins all the magic explaining how they're made. And it's like, wow, okay.
Wow,
and so opening up that kind of stuff and being willing to pivot and be humble, and that's part of the thing is as you start sharing this stuff, really listen to what people say, and not to just change everything based on every comment, but you have to listen, because that is kind of the worst thing that can happen is that your book, no matter what it is, it will borrow from other books. It will borrow from movies. Hopefully, that's going to happen. We can't, there's been so many things that like just now I'm realizing like, oh, that probably is influenced by this, or accidentally, this is really similar to that.
Yeah.
There was one that I realized recently. This I get chills about because I think it's kind of cool. It was definitely not intentional. But did you know that in Treasure Island, Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, Captain Flint, who is like the mythical big bad guy. Do you know what the name of his ship was, Raj? The name of Captain Flint's ship, the Walrus.
Oh, cool.
I'm like getting goosebumps saying it. I found that out because I read Treasure Island after I had written the original manuscript. We read Treasure Island as a family, and it mentioned that offhand, and I was like, that was just so cool that like my big pirate bad guy is a walrus. Arguably one of the most famous, fictional pirate bad guys. His ship was called the Walrus for some reason. I don't know. I want to know more.
Yeah.
I don't know. So pretty cool.
That's amazing. I of course love the Muppet Treasure Island.
Yeah, that's the real one. There's no reference to.
But they don't mention it in there. That is really funny.
They could have had an actual like Muppet Walrus, which would be really cool.
That would be really cool. What I love about what you're saying, so you've used many tools, like even being in a teaching group like Andrew Peterson's group, using Scrivener. Of course, you're familiar with StoryBrand and the hero's journey.
Yes.
And then what you talked about of being surprised by the characters, what that requires of an author. And I think this is one of the big differences between hobbyists and people who actually take it on a more professional level.
Yeah.
Is it requires you to allow characters to have a true motivation. And they're not just little versions of your own ego, you know, of like, well, everybody should do life this way because this is how I think of things. And when you think about that in terms of like the way that it impacts us, again, talking about empathy and like the way that we live, so say you get cut off by somebody in traffic. One of my like least favorite things here is the trucks where the tires are almost as tall as your car, and then they cut you off and it's like, oh, what do you think, you own the road, whatever, and you get all self-righteous about it in your little Hyundai, and the judgmental part of your brain wants to go, I'll bet that guy's going to go home and beat his dog. And I'll bet he's going to drink too many beers and then he's going to commit a crime and he's going to get arrested and die in jail, whatever, and like you want to just like
That's a great story arc there.
You just want to write a tragedy for this person, because you're just like, my way of living is better and this person is completely wrong and whatever. When it honestly just might be that like that person's car was so big they didn't see you. And they might be a perfectly lovely citizen who, grew up in a tradition of monster trucks and whatever. And it's a thing that they shared with their dad who recently passed and whatever. And, it's like, you might actually have a whole lot more in common with this person than you thought.
I think Raj is giving away the synopsis of his next novel right there. Big trucks.
Monster, trucks.
Big trucks, big feelings. Monster, truck.
But the point being that if you're just writing a book to just kind of affirm the way that you live, which there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But it's probably just not for everybody. It's a thing for you to haven't got. It's like journaling with fake characters, and that's fine. Like processing the world through writing is a great thing. It's called logotherapy,
It's very good. Yeah.
And I highly recommend. However, to write something that actually surprises you. Like your reader's not going to be surprised if you're not surprised. Your reader's not going to cry if you don't cry. Your reader's not going to laugh if you don't laugh at these things. And that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of not only just like sitting in the chair writing, but a lot of personal work to be open to, Isaiah's ideas, but also even if you're not writing with somebody else, to be open to people being different and having different motivations, because that's what makes them interesting.
Interesting, exactly.
And then especially when, things work out for people who are different from you and did things differently from how you would, that's what changes you. And when we see that in books, it's funny, with my book, there's a lot of kind of back and forth and will they, won't they, that happens in my book. And people will often, comment of like, oh, I was so frustrated with the characters at this point. And I love hearing that.
Yeah.
Because that means that they believe the characters,
Right.
It's like, can't you just get it together? And it's like, yes, but you believe that the conflict is real. You believe that people would act this way, because otherwise, if you get to that point in a book where you're just like, this is so stupid, I can't,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna throw anybody under the bus, but I've watched a few things recently where it's just like on Netflix where it's just like, oh my gosh, this is like, not great, and so it does take this discipline, and if you're just writing something that's, I think it's Hemingway who said, "Kill your darlings," and talking about writing, where like if everything in your book is precious to you, you can almost guarantee it's not a good book.
Yes.
Because it's about the grandpa and the kids and whatever, and it all has to be precious and perfect and nice. If it's nice and sweet and nothing of any consequence happens, then it's a nice heirloom thing that just is kind of helps you tell the story of your family and that grandpa was a little creative and whatever, and that's totally okay.
Yeah, there's no shame there.
But you have to be willing to go to a harder place, a more difficult place, if you want to put something out there that other people are actually interested in reading.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I've definitely gotten a lot of feedback like that from kids that are and their parents and stuff. They're like, "Oh, I can't believe like this happened with this character, and whoa, why'd you do that?" And they're just so like, or like, "I can't wait for the next book because I want to know how this part like resolves." And so that gives me a lot of pressure to write the next one and that it really lands.
Yeah.
But so I've done that to myself. But but also it just shows like they really care, and those different personalities and stuff like that. That was an interesting part of it. Part of it because the main characters are based on my kids, so I'm oftentimes being like, how would they be motivated? Like, what would they? It caused me to think about my own kids. Not perfectly. I mean, there's some things that maybe they would have done differently, of course, but like that provided a good template for me of like every kid. And if any of you listening have kids, they're not. A lot of people think our kids look very similar. They're very different. Their motivations are very different, what they're into. And so like Raj was saying a minute ago about how, one character is just, he's really brainy and he just likes to be perceived as smart and wants people to like think really highly of him. And then the other one is just all about adventure and doing dangerous stuff. And
is shirtless 5 minutes into the book.
Like, he finds some excuse to take his shirt off and
puts it back on.
Turn something into a spear and this and that. And, it's just like, that's one of the kids. And then the other kid is just a lot more sensitive, a lot more sweet. He just wants to like, play harmonica and and sing and stuff like that. And so they all have kind of different characters.
We'll be dropping a poll in the comments to see which kid is which.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, find out which ficus.
Let's all psychoanalyze Ben's kids. That'll be fun for the internet.
Ficus family adventure kid are you? But that's been so fun too, talking to different people who've read the book, being like, "Oh my goodness, so and so is my favorite character," or this scene was my favorite. And at first, like, there was a lot of people who like really just loved the youngest brother, Gus's story. But I'm finding more and more like, oh, I just loved Alexander. He is who I resonated with. Or like, oh, Arthur was my favorite. And I'm just finding like every kid is different. And as they read it, they read themselves into that story.
It's that Ninja Turtle thing. I mean, when I was growing up, it used to be, it's like if you're kind of a natural leader, it's Leonardo. If you're the, youngest of the family, you're Michelangelo.
So which Ninja Turtle were you? I don't know if we've talked
I feel
about
like
this.
I was kind of a Leonardo Donatello mix. Donatello was like the brainy one, but he was more scientific, and I wasn't there. But yeah, I mean, I think part of, like, I'm the oldest boy in my family, and especially in Indian families, that kind of comes with a lot of responsibility, or at least the implied sense of responsibility, even if that doesn't end up panning out later in life of like, it's a little patriarchal, whatever. But you're raised in a way that it's like, you're gonna have to like grow up and be a man and take care of family and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so I remember one time I was working at a church, and the pastor was just like, "You're what people would call the dude." Like when you're in a room, like the discussion can go on whatever, but before a decision is made, everybody just kind of looks at you and sees what you think. And that was kind of confirmation of the Leonardo thing for me. Now, I don't have any designs on like being president or anything like that, but I've been in many leadership positions, and it's kind of borne out. And it's kind of funny to me, like when people say that they identify with Michelangelo, who's like the pizza party guy, whatever. Yeah. My brain just goes, really? Like,
so I didn't really watch like the shows and stuff as a kid. I just knew the colors. So I just liked Raphael because he was red. Yeah. That was like my thing. Yeah. But like, what's his like personality really? I
want to say he's like the philosopher kind of.
Oh, like, is he? Okay.
Or maybe he's the violent one.
I think he's more the hot-headed one, right? Yeah. Which is funny because I think probably personality-wise, I'm probably more Michelangelo. It's my Michelangelo sweater.
Yeah. Which is funny. I think is we talked about this before, that sometimes the enthusiasm and the lightheartedness that you bring into meetings, early on, I didn't appreciate it for what it was, even though I enjoyed the benefits of it. Like one of the first things that we ever worked on was this magazine for the college I was working at, and while we were mocking up covers for it, Ben started putting pictures of controversial Christian leaders on there, like televangelists and that kind of stuff, who we would never
Shout
allow.
out to Benny Hinn.
Yeah.
If he's listening.
To speak at the college. And, we're definitely not aligned with us in any way. And like, I enjoyed that. Like, it added fun and levity to that process. And I still remember it 12 years later, and
should dig that up.
So it's, I've enjoyed the process of that, but I'm also not that kind of person by nature, and so I wouldn't have said like, "Oh yeah, we definitely need a Michelangelo on this product or a project." But when you don't have them, you can feel it. And now we're to the point where there will be certain meetings where I go, "Ben, I need you to be in this one, because we need to bring some hope, some levity, some lightness, either to kick it off or to like bring energy back to this project or whatever." And we've certainly grown our understandings of each other's strengths over the years, but it's cool to see that in a book. Like I said, I was incredibly surprised by, and not because I doubted your talent, but for one, you certainly downplay your writing skills in real life. A lot of how we got started was you asking me to write things for the websites. It's like, I'll make them pretty. You just put all the words. Yeah. And so it kind of gave the impression that you didn't enjoy writing or weren't good at it. And then it's like this comes out and it's like, oh, you've been sandbagging this whole time. You're actually quite
it's hard to do both, I will say.
Totally.
I think that's the thing. Like, I can write, and I've always enjoyed writing. That's interesting, because I never thought of myself as a writer, but mainly because it's like I just focused on the art, and it's like I can do both, but like that, there's a brain switch that happens.
Oh, totally.
And it's hard.
It's the same thing where you've been surprised with me sometimes, where like if I either have to throw something together in Photoshop or InDesign or whatever real fast, it's like, oh yeah, there actually are some design chops there, but the switch is so hard, and I'm also just much slower, and it would take me years and years and years to even be close to your level. Where you are now, and by that point you'd still be way ahead of me. But
it's just so funny because like when we look at like websites together, like we were looking at a potential client's website together, and I'm immediately just thinking visuals, and like, okay, that shouldn't be there. That's not a good image. That logo is not readable. Blah 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 blah. And then you're like, yeah, and that message is really not connecting with it. It's like, and I see all that. I know it if I just switch gears, because I had that this morning actually, where a friend wanted to meet with me and show me the website he's working on and like get my thoughts. And I was looking, I was like, it's actually designed pretty good. It's like a pretty nice, responsive template, nice. And he's like, what do you think about what it's saying? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's not. It's not good. Like, and then I totally like story brand. I did the whole Raj thing.
Yeah.
And like, I can do that.
Yeah.
And I was like, totally, see it from their perspective and not yours. And you're the guy. And I can do all of that stuff. But it's just like, it's like, I don't know, Jekyll and Hyde. I have to like completely switch people sometimes, switch hats to be like, oh yeah, I'm just looking visually like this looks good from a visual standpoint. And then it's like, switch hats. Oh, what are you trying to say? That like no one's gonna buy this crap. So I think it's like it's an interesting conundrum that I find myself in.
Yeah. Let's do a couple of quick questions as we kind of wrap up here. First one is, what's been the most meaningful response that you've gotten to the book?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I definitely seeing Megan, my wife Megan, read the book. She was not as involved in all of this, and so it's kind of just been happening around her. And obviously, like when she finished it, she like tears were like streaming down her face. And of course, she's reading her kids into the story and all this stuff. And so that was really powerful, of course. But there's been a few adults that have read the book that just. They were blown away by it, or there was someone who read it was reading it on an airplane flight and said that they cried at the end as well. Sorry, it's not like supposed to be a tearjerker, but there are some emotional things that happen, and that's really cool because it's targeted to kids, but that it can make a grown person be moved emotionally like that is pretty powerful.
And good stories are good stories.
Yeah, that's the hope, right? Yeah, exactly. And I still love a lot of youth. Things that are intended for the youths. Like I mentioned, I'm halfway through the Harry Potter series, and it's great. There's a reason why people, of all ages, like that. It's really good stuff. It's a good story. And then the other one is just when I run into kids and they just come up to me and are asking when the next book is coming out, or they want to tell me their favorite character, like those kind of things. Like it's a little overwhelming, and my kids are kind of getting freaked out by it. That's that's like an unintended consequence. Is like. They're feeling like kids are wanting to ask them about the book all the time. And, it's just an interesting thing for them to kind of navigate. It's not something I really thought through all the way, because kids that know my kids, they think these characters are them. And so they're like, wow, you're famous now, kind of a thing in our own small little world, of course. And that's been an interesting thing to try to navigate with them. And so, I don't know, maybe I could have done that a little differently. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think what will be interesting is see how, these characters who are, a little bit more, single-minded than your kids are. Like, because kids are really complex. Will probably go off in a direction eventually that deviates from where your kids actually are, and they will live and breathe as their own characters a lot more. So that'll be interesting. I think one of the best pieces of feedback I've heard about the book and that I've experienced is there's a lot of kids who don't necessarily love reading who have responded really well to the book, and that it's kind of gotten them into reading. And and it's not even just not liking to read at all, but maybe only read graphic novels or those kinds of things. It reads so fast and so interesting that it really grabs people's attention. And I love seeing that.
Me too. That's been incredible. Yeah, there's been several, especially boys. I feel like a lot of girls like read this like really fast and stuff like that. But there's some boys, and some of my kids included, actually, they're just drawn more towards the visual, like reading graphic novels, stuff like that, comic books. I think there's enough pictures and it's fast paced enough that it's been really cool to see the feedback of like kids who don't typically read a 300-page book actually reading this one or getting really far really fast, and their parents being amazed. And so our friend Jason Rothfuss was texting me over Christmas break that his kid got it. I think their kid's in maybe 10 years old or something like that. And he just wouldn't he read the whole thing in a day and just like wouldn't put it. He was like texting me pictures of them just walking around with their nose in a book all day. Yeah. So that's pretty cool.
Which, can I say, is one of the best things as an author, like, please do that. Don't think like, oh, I'm sure everybody's like reaching out, telling you how great it is, whatever. It's like, no, by all means, this takes years and years of work, and feel free to reach out and tell people that you're enjoying their book, because it does mean a lot to people. It helps keep them going.
Keeps them going. Yeah, exactly.
So along those lines, where do you want to go with your writing? What's not only next for you, because obviously it's book 1 and we got hopefully book 2 coming.
Yes.
But then also like just in a little bit broader, where do you hope that your writing takes you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, obviously I'm already like 18 chapters into the next book, at least the first draft of the next book. So I think for in writing in general, I think I just want to make it more of a daily practice. Like we talked about in our last episode, I've been journaling my whole life. So I'm like always kind of writing. But like there's something different about this kind of writing that I really enjoy. It really stretches different creative muscles, obviously. So I do want to make it more of a practice, regardless of kind of what, book I'm writing. There's at least 3 or 4 books in this series. And so I've already have them kind of roughly outlined, kind of roughly know where they're going to go. And so that's going to keep me busy for a while. Hopefully it won't take me 6 years every one. I am really working on going faster now that so much has been defined. The world has really been defined. It's really just kind of the storytelling aspect. And so I'm having a lot of fun with that. And so, anyways, like, and now that it's a real thing too, there's just a natural momentum. Getting these kind of stories, like there's a while there, like 4 years into the 6-year process, it was like, maybe it's not a real thing. I don't know. No one really knows about it. But as soon as you start getting it out, then it's like, there's this expectation.
And the milestones, like it's kind of like running a trail that you've run before. Or,
exactly. Well, and like think of, I mean, you too, Raj, but like, think of how much we've learned in this first book. I have learned so much about editing, about writing, just in general. There's so many things that are going to be different. Just going through the editing process with my editor, things that she pointed out is like, dang, that's so good. Like so many edits that were like, yeah, you're not going to have that edit in the next book because I'm just not going to write that way. I'm going to write it a little bit differently, showing it instead of, explaining. And so there's so many like little things like that, just like little tips and tricks that I learned along the way about formatting. Like there's so many things that I learned in book 1 that we're just not going to have the same learning curve. Because when you're first starting, and for any of those who want to, and we help people do this stuff now too. So if you do have something you're working on, it's overwhelming. There's so many different things to consider and to worry about and to think about and to pay for and whatever. And so now that I've got one under my belt, it does feel more like the next one. There's just less unknowns, and even like Raj and I, before we were recording, we were talking about how I started working on the audiobook version of this. A lot of people asking for the audiobook version. So that's the only thing taking me away from actually writing the next book is working on recording the audiobook. And I love doing all the voices and everything. But like, there's a big learning curve there as well. And like how to distribute that and best ways to record and edit and all this stuff. And especially if you're doing it yourself. And so there's just learning all along the way and how to promote your stuff. But I think the big thing is like making time for writing, no matter what it is, trying to make it more of a daily practice than just little spurts when I'm on vacation. Because you and I both know I don't go on vacation enough. Maybe that's something I should change.
Well, I'm looking forward to the eventual movie series or whatever. So if any of you know people at Angel Studios or wherever,
there you go. Shout out.
It would be very cool. Something that you mentioned about seeing this to completion, like it being important for your kids to see you complete this. That's something that I underestimated with writing my own book. Was that, you and I both grew up in a time where creative careers were not lucrative, typically.
And, starving artists and stuff.
And even still, it's a lot of work to make a living being a creative. But, I wonder, like, your kids are not only seeing you do this, but they're getting to participate in doing this. And so it feels like they're miles ahead of where we were at that age. because they see it as just realistic, like it's a normal thing. It's
you
kind of
can
like,
do this.
Yeah, it's kind of like when your parent's a doctor and you're like, yeah, I could go to med school, whatever. It's like, it's not a question of like, is this a possible future or whatever.
Right.
It's like, no, I'm watching it, and so I know it's possible, and I even kind of know some of the roadmap. So I just think that's such a beautiful thing. The book itself is amazing, but also the example you're setting for your kids, and for not just your own kids, but for other kids. One thing I personally love is just the high level of quality, the unwillingness to just put it at this is precious to me and my kids, and so I get to make all the decisions, and it doesn't matter if you don't like it because you don't get my genius. It's like, no, instead it's like working really hard to make this something of value to other people, and man, you knocked it out of the park. And
thank you, Raj. Thank you.
So that's it. No.
You.
You can find Escape from Terikiak, book 1 of that series, on Amazon and also on Ben's website.
Thanks for joining us today on Growing a Fruitful Brand. If you found today's show helpful, don't forget to subscribe and consider sharing it with someone who might also enjoy it.
If you'd like to work with Fruitful on a branding, website, or messaging project of your own, you can always reach out on our website, fruitful.design.
But until next time, don't forget to grow something good.